Welcome everyone to the 4th annual Bohdan Medwidsky Memorial Lecture. Вітаю всіх на 4-й щорічній лекції пам'яті Богдана Медвідського. I'm Larissa Cymbaluk-Chelyadin, the Kule Chair of Ukrainian Ethnography and the Interim Director of the Peter and Doris Kule Center for Ukrainian and Canadian Folklore. Today's Medwidsky lecture is co-hosted by the Kule Folklore Center and the Alberta Society of the Advancement of Ukrainian Studies. I see many familiar faces, but for those of you who are joining us for the first time here in person or online, I'd like to share with you a little bit about who he was and who he still is to us. Dr. Bohdan Medwidsky was a folklorist, academic organizer, community activist, Ukrainian patriot, fundraiser, and a mentor to many of us who are here today. He was born in Ivano-Frankivsk in 1936, and as a young boy spent the duration of World War II in Switzerland. Then, in the 1940s, he reunited with his parents and brother in Vienna, and they spent time in the displaced persons camp in Lexenfeld, Germany. Together with his family, Bohdan immigrated to Canada after the war, where he completed high school in Toronto, later a BA in Humanities and an MA in Slavic Studies at the University of Ottawa, and then he moved back to Toronto to complete a PhD in Ukrainian Studies. In 1971, Bohdan accepted a position in Ukrainian linguistics here at the University of Alberta, and as they say, the rest is history. Motivated by an ethnic revival and roots movement across North America in the 1970s, Bohdan seized the opportunity to teach classes in Ukrainian folklore at the U of A, the first which was offered in 1977. This initiative quickly grew into a specialization and eventually into MA and PhD programs in the Department of Modern Languages and Cultural Studies. The courses became really popular, and the growth of Ukrainian folklore classes and the rise of graduate programming necessitated a strategic plan. This led to the development of a curriculum and an academic research center with resources to support students, faculty, and the community at large. Dr. Medwidsky's passion and perseverance eventually led to the establishment of 9 endowments and the Peter and Doris Kule Center for Ukrainian and Canadian Folklore. Later, in 2003, the Bohdan Medwidsky Ukrainian Folklore Archives were named in his honor. The Kule Folklore Center and Medwidsky Archives continue to grow and are now internationally recognized as one of the major research and resource centers in North America dedicated to the study of Ukrainian and Canadian folklore and ethnography. The passing of Dr. Medwidsky in 2021 was unexpected and hard for many of us. He was the one who kept us motivated and focused, and he ensured that the center was financially self-sufficient. Though he did not typically like to speak about himself, he sometimes noted, "Я будую Україну," I'm building Ukraine, in my own way here in Canada. This is profoundly true, and his impact will continue on. As I mentioned earlier, our co-sponsor is the Alberta Society of the Advancement of Ukrainian Studies, and I'd like to invite Alexander Pankeyev to come up here to share a little bit about his personal experiences with Dr. Medwidsky. Alexander.
Thank you, Larissa. Community is about recognizing, honoring, and preserving what we share. Our roots, traditions, history, and language. The Ukrainian diaspora has excelled in this. However, maintaining identity and cultural knowledge and ensuring that they are passed from one generation to the next has not been always an easy task. Yet, there have always been champions who work tirelessly to ensure the Ukrainian community thrives. One such champion was Bohdan Medwidsky, whose impact has extended beyond Alberta to the rest of Canada and even Ukraine, where his achievements are still recognized. Medwidsky often reflected on what it means to be Ukrainian. As a child, He was separated from his family, and when they were reunited after the Second World War, he could not speak Ukrainian language. He had to rebuild his connections, not just only with his family, but also with his cultural roots. He found a way to do this through his professional career as a folklorist. But Bohdan Medwidsky was not the kind of academic who dwelt in an ivory tower. He immersed himself in the community, using his expertise to directly connect with people. Working closely with many community organizations and leaders, he convinced them of the importance of researching and studying folklore. Thanks to his efforts and the generous support of prominent community leaders such as Peter and Doris Kule, Eras Utseliak, Vasil and Anna Kureli, and many others, he was able to establish and strengthen the Ukrainian folklore program at the University of Alberta. This program has produced many PhD and master's graduates specializing in folklore, further solidifying the study and preservation of Ukrainian culture in Canada. I often reflect on how fortunate I have been to have mentors who guided me through the personal and professional growth at every stage of my life. I feel especially lucky to have known Bohdan Medwidsky. When I arrived in Canada many years ago, he was the person who introduced me to the richness of the Ukrainian-Canadian community here. He helped me to uncover and understand its many layers, revealing the intricate web of connections shared by different waves of immigration and generations of Ukrainian Canadians. I vividly remember how Bohdan Medwidsky would take me to weekly coffee meetings at the Second Cup in downtown Edmonton, where I had the opportunity to meet his friends, leaders, intellectuals, and dedicated community builders. And probably I went to those meetings for 2 years with him, not skipping the one in. These individuals left a lasting impact on the Ukrainian-Canadian society. Among them were Roman Biznura, a superintendent, he was a superintendent, Bud Conway, a well-known banker, and Albert Hoge, who served as Alberta's Minister of Advanced Education in 1970s, a time when the folklore program was envisioned and the Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies at the University of Alberta was established. Beyond his academic and research contributions, Bohdan Medwidsky was deeply involved in community life. He served on numerous boards of Ukrainian organizations and always found time to volunteer to promote their causes. One of his many lasting contributions is also co-founding the Alberta Society for the Advancement of Ukrainian Studies, an organization I now have the privilege of presenting as a president. The Alberta Society for the Advancement of Ukrainian Studies is also the co-organizer of the annual Bohdan Medwidsky Memorial Lecture held in partnership with the Kule Folklore Center. This lecture serves as an ongoing tribute to Bohdan Medwidsky, dedication to Ukrainian studies, particularly folklore, and to the broader Ukrainian community. That is why the topic of this year's memorial lecture is deeply connected to what Bohdan Medwidsky cared about deeply, community. Thank you.
Дякую, Alexander. It's a pleasure to work together again this year. One of Dr. Medwidsky's most memorable slogans was, "Trimajmoся," let's keep holding on. In this spirit, the annual Bohdan Medwidsky Memorial Lecture was established in his honor to foster his vision of supporting research and cultural preservation in order to hang on to the traditions and values that we hold so dear to us. Past presenters were folklorists, the late Robert Klamash, Dr. Andriy Nahachowski, and Maria Lesiu. This year, we invited Mr. Boris Balan, president of the Taras Shevchenko Foundation in Canada. He represents a supporting role that facilitates research, cultural development, and preservation. As noted in our promotion, Boris will reflect on a topic that's timely during these traumatic and chaotic times, that being building relationships for stronger cultural impact. Now, yesterday, I had a chance to pick him up, and he said, I can introduce myself, which I have no doubt, but I do want to share a little bit about him. I've known Boris for a long time. Without dating ourselves, I can say we first met well before we each knew exactly what we were going to study at the university and which direction our lives would take. We have a historic friendship that centers around our shared Ukrainian-Canadian background. And over the years, I can bear witness to how Boris has immersed himself in the Ukrainian community in Canada and Ukraine, and how his experiences have given him a broad perspective on the past, the present, and the future of our global Ukrainian community. Several years ago, when Boris stepped into the shoes of president of the Shevchenko Foundation, I already knew that he was the perfect person to carry on the reins, to chair the leading nationwide charitable organization which has been entrusted to preserve, develop, and promote Ukrainian-Canadian arts, heritage, community, and education. Today, it's my honor to invite Boris to the podium to share with us his perspective on the contribution of the Ukrainian community in Canada to cultural preservation and development, and reflect on the future challenges and opportunities ahead of us. Boris.
Thank you, Larissa and Alexander, earlier for your introductory words to the whole event, and Bohdan Medwidsky and his importance to us as a community. I think it was very appropriate, and I was glad to hear them again today. I want to thank, first of all, the organizers for this Bohdan Medwidsky Memorial Lecture, and the Kule Folklore Center, and the co-organizers for their kind invitation to invite me to address you today. I know and respect the work of the Kule Center and the University of Alberta Ukrainian program more broadly, and the important research that you conduct and everything you do, especially the Kule Center, to record and understand the traditions and cultural practices of the hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians who emigrated to Canada, and there are more than 4 million descendants in the country now. My respect only grew sizably today when I had the opportunity to stop by the Kule Center and meet students and workers at the Kule Center and see the passion, the intelligence, the commitment that they bring to the study of this topic. And it really made me feel good, I think, as a Ukrainian Canadian interested in these things, to see that new generation doing that work with that commitment and everything else. So congratulations to the Kule Center and everyone involved. And hearing the list of speakers from the past, I suspected that most previous Medwidsky lecturers focused really on sharing research on the folklore of Ukrainian Canadians. Obviously, this is not something I can do. But I do want to start by just sharing a little bit about my personal interest in the study of folklore, Ukrainian folklore, and how it really shaped my Ukrainian-Canadian identity. The seeds were planted growing up in a Ukrainian family in Toronto, which obviously observed traditional holidays, maintained cultural practices, spoke Ukrainian, at least when my father was looking, and went to church and participated in the community life. That interest was really sharpened in the 1970s when I attended a series of camps called Selo that the Canadian Ukrainian Youth Association put on, which really did a lot to build up my interest in the culture and traditions of my ancestors and of the Ukrainian people generally. And it was through that community formed around the Selo experience that I first met Bohdan Medwidsky, the late Bohdan Medwidsky. Over the years, our paths often crossed for a variety of reasons, and he was always keen to share his interest and deep knowledge and love of Ukrainian folklore and culture. I can't say I remember everything he taught me, because he taught me a lot. But as I got older, I often reflect on the most important words he told me, which was, "Я йду там, де цісар пішки ходить." And as you get older, you appreciate the wisdom of those words and the importance of them. I think everyone understands what he meant. He had a wonderful sense of humor. He was a wonderful man. I also know that Bohdan did incredible work over many years, encouraging students to explore their heritage and celebrate their culture, to write works, to share that knowledge as broadly as possible. With great vision and commitment, he helped create the Ukrainian Folklore Center here at the University of Alberta, and to ensure that that work would continue long after he's gone. Vічна йому пам'ять. Now, as I said, I'm not here to talk about my recent research in Ukrainian folklore. But what I want to talk to you about is how important that work is to the Ukrainian community in Canada and to all Canadians, especially those, obviously, who trace their roots to Ukraine. And I also want to talk about the role of the Shevchenko Foundation, of which I'm currently the president, in supporting that work and that vision. The Shevchenko Foundation was founded over 60 years ago by the Ukrainian Canadian Congress. At that time, the community, through the UCC, felt the need and the importance of recognizing Taras Shevchenko, the great bard of the Ukrainian people, who really almost single-handedly created the idea of a modern Ukrainian identity, using a language that had been banned for decades and really teaching Ukrainians about their history, their culture, and their past. By 1963, Ukrainians in Canada had established a strong community and wanted to both celebrate that by honoring Taras Shevchenko on the 100th anniversary of his death, and to share with all Canadians a statement about who we Ukrainian Canadians were, by erecting a statue to Shevchenko on a prominent location at the Manitoba Legislature. On the screen, you see a picture from that unveiling, and if you squint really, really hard, maybe you'll see a 4-year-old Boris Balan fidgeting in the back somewhere, because I was part of that crowd, and with my family who came from Toronto for that opening. It was that important an event for the Ukrainian community of Canada. The project was a great success, and the statue still stands very proudly for all to enjoy and reflect on Ukraine's history and culture. But very importantly, it didn't just end with the statue, the erection of a statue. The whole effort generated excess funds that were used to put up this statue, but there are excess funds, and that through the generosity of thousands of Ukrainians across the country. And that money was then diverted to create a permanent endowment to support the cultural life of Ukrainian Canadians. That was the Shevchenko Foundation. A great event in Ukrainian history where something came in under budget and we had a surplus at the end, but that's what happened. That was the commitment that people had. So the money that was left over from that seeded the Shevchenko Foundation to become that permanent endowment to support our culture and our community life in Canada. It was a pretty modest beginning, $35,000. But over the years, and over the thousands of donations, at first small, but growing over time, we've created a foundation which has distributed to date over $13 million to various community events, community projects, community and cultural things, initiatives in Canada, and built a permanent endowment of almost $40 million today. In my original notes of this, I sort of said $40 million in counting, although given the last 2 days, that might mean counting backwards. But for people who have been generous and entrusted money to us, I can only reassure them that that money is well invested by a very responsible group and very well, and we're going to ride through these different market things, but we'll always have a significant endowment to support the work that is set out before us. The Shevchenko Foundation is governed by a cross-Canada board of directors who bring a very broad knowledge and perspective on our community life, on the needs that we see as a community in front of us, on our cultural importance. It's supported by a small professional staff based in Winnipeg. I'm pleased that there are actually 3 current directors of the Shevchenko Foundation here in Edmonton. Oresia Leni is here. I saw her earlier. She's here at the event. I know Roman Soltakevich had the good excuse that he's flying from South America at this moment, so we'll forgive him. And Christine Zvozdetsky, who's our treasurer, are the current members of the board, and providing important perspective of what happens here at Edmonton. Previously, you might, the gentleman right here sitting in front, Andriy Hladishevsky, was on the board and president for many, many years, so I recognize and thank him for that contribution. And Gord Gordey is over here as well, who a longtime member of the board. So we have always had a very close relationship with the community in Edmonton and with things that are going on here. These people bring an important perspective to, again, that all-Canadian foundation that is the Shevchenko Foundation, of the needs and the priorities of the community here and in Western Canada more generally. While I'm very proud of the Foundation's history and could speak at great length about our accomplishments to date, I really think it's obviously much more important to talk about who we are now, what priorities we have identified, and what we can continue to do to serve our community into the future. On our website, and I hope people have had a chance to look in the past at it, you will find, as is typical with organizations, a mission and a vision statement that really are set to guide the work overall of the Foundation. A lot of thought goes into those mission statements, and we're currently refining it again as a result of a strategic planning exercise that we do every several years to make sure that we're still reflecting what we believe are the priorities of the community. So that will be updated. But in essence, what doesn't change is the fundamental commitment that we have to create a strong Ukrainian community in Canada where people can celebrate their connections and common identity with friends, family, their ancestors, and their historical homeland. We're also committed to supporting the development of a very vibrant Ukrainian Canadian culture in Canada at the highest artistic level of expression. And finally, it's something that when I reread my notes, I made this point a dozen times, which is kind of stupid, but it is important to us, as I'll try not to do it every time. But we're also very much committed to making sure that everything we do is shared as broadly as possible with Canadians, with people outside the organized Ukrainian Canadian community, with people who should really see Ukrainian Canadians and who should understand our history and our culture here and really see us as an important part of the Canadian mosaic. So a lot of our attention is projects, initiatives, activities that are good for the community, that are reflective of our culture, that move our culture forward, but are also shared broadly with as many people as possible. It's an important factor. Now, obviously, we don't do all of this on our own. What we do, we channel the very generous donations we receive to provide financial, organizational, and sometimes even just moral support to individuals and collectives who create culture, and to organizations and institutions that provide the critical infrastructure for this work and for the community life as a whole. An important aspect of this is our reliance on working in partnership, hence the title of the talk today. Individuals and organizations can use their talents and their expertise, their energy, and their own resources with our help, with our financial help primarily, to achieve their greater goals. This also includes working with other funding bodies to try to improve and get more money available for the things that we're doing. So, for example, the Canada-Ukraine Foundation, geared mainly to assisting recent refugees coming to Canada. We administered a very large project together with them on giving support to these people who are temporarily displaced to Canada. So we're looking for opportunities to partner very much with our own institutions and organizations and also with others to provide the support that's needed for us. Over the years, we have established 4 pillars that really are the foundations for our work and that allow us to target funding and support to address what we believe are the most important needs of our community. On our website and our annual reports and elsewhere, you'll see how we describe the goals of these pillars, the types of activities and initiatives we support, the criteria we will apply in judging an application against our stated goals, and the expectations we will have of the applicant. We are, after all, a funding body which provides money. We are stewards of money. We want to make sure that it's used well. We want to make sure that it's distributed to the needs that are greatest that we have in front of us, that we've identified, that the community shares, and that it's done as transparently and professionally as possible. So I always recommend and encourage people, if you're interested in what we can do specifically for things that you might be involved with, please look carefully at the website and find where your initiative and where your work fits into what we think we can do. So when we talk about pillars, the first pillar we can talk about is what we generally call community development. Under this pillar, or in this area, we support initiatives that create a greater sense of community, strengthening our common identity here in Canada and the bonds between us. That may include financial support for programs run for youth organizations, summer camps for kids, the many festivals that are held across this country to celebrate the Ukrainian community, and to bring tens of thousands of people together in that common celebration. I've seen pictures. I've not been to your festival in Edmonton, but I know that it's a growing festival. Vegreville, in Toronto, there's a Bloor West Festival. There's a lot of these things, and we think they're a very important way to bring people together and reinforce that sense of community. And you can see some pictures there, Vegreville Pesinka Festival, as a matter of fact. Under this pillar, we also support community organizations that do, cultural activities and things for the community primarily. Things that are really there to entertain and, again, give a sense of purpose and commonality to our community in general. Under this pillar, we also provide funding for the Ukrainian Canadian Congress, its regional branches or organizations, as the main institution representing and organizing Ukrainian Canadian life in Canada. That's very generally what we call community development. In all cases, really, this support is directed to community organizations, as they are the ones responsible for delivering the project or the program. For that reason, when we look at applications that come to us, we look at the capacity of the organization to undertake the work, their history, their track record, and their governance, quite simply also. It's an important factor that they will be able to deliver what they plan to deliver and have asked us to support. As I keep saying, as we see this as a partnership, we also expect our partners, in these cases, to provide support of their own, volunteer hours, financial contributions, and everything else that makes this project work. That's what's important in terms of the success, the financial support, but financial commitment, organizational, manpower commitment from organizations that do things. That's really the best way to also see how the project resonates with the broader community and is it meeting the expectations of people in our community. The second pillar that I can talk a little bit about is what we call education. Pretty straightforward. That's really there to address the educational needs of our community. So that will include support for preparation of teaching materials and for institutions involved in educating Ukrainians and all Canadians about our rich history and culture. We support academic research, conferences, publications, including several by your own Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies here, and by the Ukrainian Language Center at the University of Alberta as well. We also provide support and funding for students, mainly students either at the graduate level pursuing graduate studies in Ukrainian studies, of which, to be honest, there aren't all that many because the programs are not that widely available, but to the degree that there is a need and we can do things we have in the past and will do that in the future. But we also provide smaller grants for mainly for students studying Ukrainian language. For several years, we were providing bursaries to send students who are going to accredited courses in Ukraine to learn Ukrainian better. More recently, because of the war, some of these things are happening in Poland, but we've been providing those kinds of things. So we work with students, student organizations. SUSK is an example here. Try to respond to both the student needs and also to provide the resources to the community for teaching and educating Ukrainians about Ukraine and educating everyone. In this image, you'll see some recent student recipients of our bursaries that we've been giving out that they use to support their studies. Roman Nikiforovich, if a young fellow I met there, the violinist, is studying music at the University of Toronto with a great Ukrainian emphasis on his work. And Natalia, I don't recall her last name, is at Emily Carr University doing work exploring ancient Ukrainian traditions in design. Interesting combination. Those are the kinds of things that we've done. That's in education. The next pillar that I'll talk about is what we generally call the arts. I think there's probably a different name, but I forgot to look it up. It's really there to support the variety of ways that in which we express our rich Ukrainian culture. We know the community has many incredible performing groups, dance ensembles, choirs, theater groups that perform for large and small audiences across the country. We're keen to support them in creating new and innovative presentations and improving and raising up their artistic skills. This could include and does include support for dance schools, commissioning new musical compositions, making films, something that's become quite a big issue in the last number of years with new media things. A lot of people coming recently from Ukraine with experience in this, looking at things. So filmmaking is something that we like because it's a great way to reach that broad audience that I was talking about earlier. But it's a difficult area for us to work in just because we just don't fully understand how the whole thing works, and it's a very expensive process, but we are doing what we can to support filmmaking. That's part of our arts program. Artistic exhibitions, commissioning of new artworks, showing exhibits of Ukrainian Canadian art. Again, in all these things, we're trying to reach as big an audience as we can. In this image, you can see a couple of people. One is Natalia Gennady at the left there, who's performing at that point in the mezzo-soprano, performing at the Vancouver Lights Festival, sharing her Ukrainian repertoire in a broad festival of music and singers. On the right is an interesting small short film we helped finance called Flyer Boys, done by Taras Lisyuk in Toronto. Lovely little film. I went to the initial screening, and it's now available on GEM, I'm told, so you can find it. It's a short, but it's a lovely story about a young boy and his grandfather and how they go around delivering flyers in both Ukrainian and English, you're talking. These are all the things that, broadly we capture in our arts program. As I said, and I'm going to repeat it again, a major goal of this is to try to ensure that our artistic expression is shared broadly and seen broadly. Not just for traditionally what would have been done in 1963 when the Shevchenko Foundation, it was really an internal community thing. We did performances in our church basements for ourselves. That was the reality of the starting point. We're way beyond that as a community now. And not only do we want to and feel the need to really reach out to all Canadians so they appreciate who we are and what we are, but let's be honest, when we talk about the 1.4 million Canadians of Ukrainian background, the vast majority of them are also not engaged in our traditional community organizations. And they're really part of our market, to make sure that they have the opportunity to rediscover roots, to understand a little bit more, to see things. But you can't reach them through a church basement. You can't reach them through a community hall. You have to reach them on GEM TV or at the Windspear Performing Center or whatever it's called. That's where we feel we have to go. So that's what we're really working on that good. In this area, in this respect, we also really try to support cooperation between Ukrainian performing groups and Ukrainian artists, if you will, and non-Ukrainian groups, that they can work together to create, perform new works, do things collaboratively. It's an important partnership that we also want to support. And also at that time, we've been able to support non-Ukrainian institutions, choirs. Montreal Symphony Orchestra wanted to add a composition by Stankiewicz, I think, to their performance. That's great. Montreal, they reached out to us. We want to do this. We said, we want to help you. So we could give them support so they would put Stankiewicz on the stage with the rest of the repertoire of the Montreal Symphony Orchestra. So we're looking at those two things very, very important to us. In this area of the arts, we fully appreciate the importance of supporting talented individuals in the creation of new, innovative, and dynamic expressions of our culture. And not just groups, collectives, organizations. Art is very often driven by individuals. And, as opposed to what we had, probably in the past and at the Shevchenko Foundation, other places, the focus was on a dance group comes to you and you support this or not. Now we're able to look more at an individual comes with an artistic idea and we can support them to realize that and bring life to something like that. I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. In this slide, you'll see works by Taras Lachkovsky, deeply rooted in the Ukrainian folk. I think it was probably displayed here in Edmonton. It was certainly in Toronto. We were able to help give an audience to this kind of expression of Ukrainian culture. Very proud of that kind of stuff. Now, the creation and sharing of culture very broadly requires a sophistication and is an expensive process. It requires resources. So we are trying to respond, and we have in the past done a lot, and I'll just sort of focus on two things that maybe bring some life to that. The first one, you probably know, have heard about the Kobzar Book Awards that the Shevchenko Foundation has been running. It's not really part of this pillar that I'm talking about. It's a program that we run. But it's the opportunity where we recognize writing about Ukrainians in Canada through the award, as well as up-and-coming writers making their first step as professionals in a short story process. It's a similar idea. It was intended, and it started as helping authors and rewarding authors and recognizing authors for sharing and telling the Ukrainian-Canadian story. It's been a very successful project, I think, and it's really shined the light on a lot of some very talented writers. But one sort of personal observation maybe on this is that, and it'll get back to our hosts of today's evening or afternoon, when the awards started, it was really focused on the idea of fiction writing. The intent was, the idea was that there'd be a lot of fiction created on these Ukrainian themes. What we soon realized, I think, is that there's a hell of a lot of interest by writers, by readers, in writing about and reading about Ukrainian culture in Canada, Ukrainian identity, very broadly, Ukrainian history, the Ukrainian-Canadian experience in general. So over the last many years, we've had many finalists and shortlisted authors who really were exploring areas that are close, I think, to the work of the Kule Center. I think one of them is Natalia Kononenko, a recent finalist, with her work on rituals in the prairies. The other one here is an earlier work, is a oral history of Ukrainians in Sudbury. Award really, I think, expanded tremendously from just fiction to really responding to what the market wanted. The market wanted to write about these things, people wanted to read about it, and we're happy that we're be able to put that up and give support and help with it. Myrna Kostas, your own Edmonton writer, she was the winner of this past year's Kobzat Award for Ukrainians in a photograph. Another special program that we run, similar I think to the Kobzat in some ways, is what we call the Reach Mentorship Residency for the Arts. This is a program, Gordon Gourdet was very instrumental in defining and bringing life to it, which is really designed to identify and then help really exceptionally talented cultural creators pursue their dreams through intensive training, through exposure to new genres in a variety of different ways. It's set up to encourage mentorship by people in the arts who can then transfer their knowledge to the Ukrainian Canadian creators and help them lift it up to another new level of presentation. It's a unique program, but really one that I think is paying dividends in creating the next generation of cultural creators and interpreters. You'll see on this slide, we have a lot of Edmonton folks showing in these things. It was partially on purpose, partially just the fact that a lot happens here in Edmonton, so we recognize that. Liana McCook is there. She was an early recipient of that award. As she's working as a playwright and a director and actress, moving things forward. Down on the bottom, I think was the first winner, Taras Kulish, out of Montreal originally. Now working at the Stratford Festival as a director, play director. So it's been a great improvement for an opportunity to give him to additional skills to work in the wider cultural world, but always at the base of everything he's doing is a lot of Ukrainian content, and we're going to see more and more of that going forward. In the middle, last year's winner, Danya Kopelna. It was a whole project based around the repurposing of Ukrainian embroidery. Interesting sort of approach. I want to say a few things about the internment of Ukrainians and others during the First World War in Canada. As you may know or may have heard, the Shevchenko Foundation received a $10 million grant from the federal government to support research and education about the unlawful internment of over 8,000 individuals and the curtailment of civil rights for thousands more during the First World War. Most of these people were Ukrainian. For 15 years, we used the returns from this capital to fund many programs and initiatives, publications, films, resource material, teaching materials that could be used in school systems, a variety of monuments, plaques, just to sort of make the public statement about the people could be reminded of this. For 15 years, we did all those programs through the Internment Fund, together with working very closely with our partners, the Ukrainian Canadian Congress and the Ukrainian Civil Liberties Association, as well as representatives from the other affected communities, because although this was largely affected Ukrainians who were interned during the First War, it wasn't just Ukrainians. It was people from the Austro-Hungarian Empire, from other places who were caught up in this, and we made sure we included them and their voices to make sure that their story was also going to be told within the bigger picture of internment. On this picture, you'll see this was returning to the theme I keep talking about, sharing as broadly as possible. This was an initiative by the Internment Council where they did a traveling exhibit with the Canadian Museum of History on the internment experience. Again, so it's not just seen by the Ukrainian community or the German community or the thing, but it's seen by everyone visiting the museum, the Canadian Museum of History, or in other places where they can see it. Very important, I think, for all of us. Now, while the agreement with the federal government has concluded, it lasted for 15 years, formal agreement, we maintain that capital. And we are committed to continually pursuing efforts to study this chapter of our Canadian history and educate Canadians about it. However, we're also using it more broadly, because the next stage of what we see the effect of this internment experience was it was a terrible experience for the individuals caught up in it. They should be recognized, remembered, and understood. But it was also a very bad experience for the community. It set community development back. It made people have issues around identifying openly with Ukrainians, maybe sharing their culture and others. So what we're doing also with funds for this project is to sort of try to correct that historic wrong as well and use it to help rebuild the community institutions or community life that was set back by this internment experience. Now, the fourth pillar that I can talk about is probably the one that will be of most interest to people here, and that's what we call heritage preservation. It's an important pillar. It's something we believe strongly in and something we want to devote a lot more effort to going forward. In this picture, you will see, this is a nice display from the Ukrainian Museum in Toronto, St. Volodymyr Institute. Great, they have a wonderful collection of embroideries, as a lot of museums do, but they've mounted a lot of things with our assistance to find an audience for. Now, as a foundation, we strongly believe that the strength of our community and our cultural life rests on the understanding and appreciation of our history here. Cultural heritage, as we understand it, as I understand it, represents our bond to the past, to our present, and the future. The preservation of material objects and the knowledge of our traditions and life here are critical to understanding us today and ensuring that future generations can enjoy the full richness of our culture and our contributions here in Canada. This commitment to cultural heritage also inspires new ways to present our culture and new abilities for artists looking at the past more carefully to see how we can present things going forward in terms of our cultural life. Under this pillar, we have concentrated on supporting institutions and museums across the country to acquire and preserve artifacts and archives documenting our history. We help them share this through exhibitions, publications, and digitization. We're very proud of a relationship that I personally, Lidis had talked about it, I've had with Lidis for a long time. Lidis has had with our foundation and some of the work that she does. And I was very fortunate yesterday, I flew in early enough that I could go down to your Royal Alberta Museum and see the installation of this work, which at that time was just scattered all over the floor somewhere as you were assembling it. A wonderful exhibit combining so many things that we're interested in. History, preservation of our artifacts. What Larissa did was she took all these printing blocks that were created by the Trident Press in Winnipeg, primarily for the first Ukrainian-Canadian newspaper called, in the Ukrainian language, well, second, I guess, Ukrainsky Holos from 1910, but also the Promin magazine and other publications. And they had this great store of their printing blocks, which unfortunately, as the organization went away, was in doubt what was going to happen. Larissa thankfully identified them, pulled them all together, and put together what I think is an incredibly interesting and enjoyable exhibit combining sort of these historical reminders of this, what was published, what was important to the community, and putting them out in a very artistic way that people can see for themselves the whole thing. It's a wonderful thing. I really encourage everyone to go there and to see it at the museum. It's still on till we should do a little bit of ad here. 23rd of June, so time is running. Make sure you get there. I personally am very keen on that project because I remember as a kid at my grandparents' house looking at Ukrainsky Holos. Wasn't the best newspaper for a kid of 8 or 10 years old, but it was, Bob and Judah liked it, and they read it, and it was an incredibly important part of our history, the Ukrainian community in Canada, and I'm so pleased that Larissa was able to sort of keep the things together and put it together and show it to all of us, show it to the visitors at your museum here, and really share it broadly, because it's a wonderful little piece of work. So again, as returning to that theme I said about the importance of sharing what we do with others, this is another example. It's, you know, it's not just, it's not here in a Ukrainian institution, it's there for the whole Canadian community to see. So far, you know, I've talked about our work, and the things I've described are really projects that we finance, that we fund, that we support. They're discrete, they're usually one-off, they're usually, you know, to deliver an output. Larissa's exhibit, you know, an exhibit of Vyshytya, whatever it is they're doing. These things are very important, you know, and also digitization. You know, we've supported several initiatives of people digitizing specific collections of material or something else. We think that's important, and we think that these projects and programs are still always going to be sort of the bread and butter of what the community does and what we can support as a foundation. But what we've really come to appreciate, I think, in the last several years, is that we have some incredibly important repositories of our material cultural heritage in Canada. You see there the Ukrainian Museum in Saskatoon, which are collecting important materials. We think that they are the long-term repositories of much of the history that we've got, and we really believe that they and others like them working in that space need something more than just individual discrete project support to man a project, to do a specific exhibit, to do something, but something more sustainable. Something that, you know, maybe they can then plan as an institution to hire an archivist. Maybe a recent graduate of the Kule Center would be probably a good place to start looking for people. Hire people and give them the confidence that for the next 2, 3, 5 years, there's going to be a commitment there for this person to use their professional skills and to really work in this whole area of heritage preservation. It's an important investment in their capacity and in the things that we think they need to do. It's especially important right now, I think, because as the community faces its own issues, and we all know about, the decline of community institutions. The thing that Larissa identified with the printing blocks from Ukrainsky Holos is a problem all over the place where organizations kind of collapse. What happens to their record of everything they did for 50 or 100 years and the contributions that their parents made and their grandparents and everything else, and really the importance of what they did for all of us here in Canada. So we think it's very important that the community take this on as a task, as a thing that requires significant investment, significant professionalization. These are the kind of things we're doing. We at the Shevchenko Foundation, we do what we can. And we've been, working as best we can to support these kinds of institutions. And, here's one of Osaraduk in Winnipeg, another such institution, very important. And we're trying to grow our capital and find additional sources of donations and money that we can then use specifically for this purpose. Long-term sustainability support for key heritage preservation, among other things, key heritage preservation institutions in Canada. We're not there yet, but we see the need, we see the demand, we see the timeliness of this need. There are records, there are material artifacts that, are in great danger of disappearing for future generations to fully appreciate if we don't get our acts together and take this on. So I'm telling you that we as the foundation are going to do our best to try to take this on and to find additional resources to support institutions like that. But again, I'm going to return to the other theme I'm trying to build here. We don't do this on our own. We can't do it on our own. We have a staff of 4 or 5 people, full and part-time in Winnipeg. We rely on partners. We rely on the Kule centers, on the Saraduks, on the museums in our major cities, on institutions like that to work with us and to really make this happen. And we're really trying to work at those kinds of partnerships, encourage them to move in that direction, which I think most do. We've had a lot of discussions. They appreciate the need for that. Also, importantly, to make sure that there's a coordinated effort across the country to do these things. The duplication of efforts is not helpful to anybody, really, if you can do these things. I often read about, digitization of books and journals and stuff. Just to make sure that the exact same book isn't being digitized in 5 different institutions. Not that necessary. Better to coordinate our efforts and therefore get a lot more bang out of our buck to move forward. So this is what we're really trying to work at. We want to work closely with these key institutions, and I said it's really just a handful of institutions, but our hope is that we can provide them significant support in the future as things permit, as the markets rebound a little bit for us, and that we can really make an impact, I think, broadly for the community's benefit in this whole area of heritage preservations. But again, we're not the answer to all these problems. We're going to be looking for other sources of funding. We're looking for institutions to provide their expertise, their capital, their money, their things to amplify everything that we can do with our support and to really get to the next stage. These things are based a lot on volunteers. You want to keep those people engaged. You want to have them, but you want to give them the guidance, the support, and the help to really make their efforts that much more effective going forward. With that, I'm going to sort of come to an end. I just want to congratulate everyone here who continues to pursue the vision of the late Bohdan Medwidsky and are committed to the study of Ukrainian Canadian folklore, a critical building block of our identity and our community. I thank everyone for your attention today, and I'll take some questions after this in a minute if you have. But I'll just finish with one last comment. We are all, I'm sure, following hourly events in Ukraine, the genocidal war that's being conducted by Russia against Ukraine. We all are appalled by it. We all are doing things we can to help Ukraine in this critical moment, and I think we all want to do that. But part of our help is also in being that Ukrainian Canadian and Ukrainian voice here. You know, that the Putin wants to destroy Ukraine as a culture, as an identity. We won't let him in Ukraine, and we can't let him here either. It's a fight that unites all of us around the world. With that, I just wanted to conclude that, we want to keep Ukraine and its fight in our thoughts, especially today. There's another horrible attack. But we build towards a future, and we think that everything will work out well, and our culture and our identity will flourish as it should. Slava Ukraini!
I just want to say, Boris, thank you very much for this. As a recipient of Shevchenko money, it has stabilized my career. But also I've been working with a lot of students over the years who have benefited from it and have seen them go on and contribute to the community, as well as other researchers, other groups, associations. So it's great, the work that you're doing, and I appreciate it. Questions?
As we read, as Ukrainians, following the events in Ukraine and the actions of the barbarians in trying to destroy Ukrainian museums, stealing and plundering and pillaging, could the Shevchenko Foundation recruit various cultural organizations in Canada and in the United States to make sure that included in any kind of peace settlement is the return of Ukrainian artifacts and things that have been stolen from Ukrainian museums?
Very good question, or a comment, or a suggestion. I have not done anything explicit that. I do know last year and 2 years ago, there was a lot of activity by community and museum groups across North America to precisely add their voice to this thing. To what degree we can help, let's take that away, because I don't think it's a bad thing. We do have restrictions, just, in terms of what we can do. We are a Canadian charitable organization. Right, so our funding is limited, and our ability to spend money is really limited to Canadian things. So that's always an issue for us. But in terms of bringing voice to these things and organizing, I think it's a great idea, and certainly more should be done, because as I concluded as well, this is a genocidal war in the broader meaning of genocide, not just killing humans, which they're doing, but killing the culture, killing the identity, and that's what we have to fight against.
I'm Oliver Rossier. Deeply grateful to the Shevchenko Foundation, the way you create a model of how to do these things. I work with a number of different organizations and other teams around campus. So, and I know a number of the people that have been doing this for many years. And I just want to say, honestly, it's a benefit not just to the community, the campus, the country, but globally. Honestly, I was daydreaming as you were speaking about, instead of the Marshall Plan, have a Shevchenko plan. How does the Shevchenko Foundation imagine maybe a place in building that collaboration as, the war will end at some point? And it is a national organization here, but you are like a lighthouse, and you're carrying the voice and the projects. Digitization is a great example. Mm-hmm. Digitize once, we've got amazing teams here, share globally. So I don't know if you have, thoughts on how that might be coming together.
Anything specific I can't say. The imperative of doing these things is clear to everybody. We have responded, recently and in many ways, to bring the Ukrainian voice to Canada, if you will, from the current Ukraine. A couple of years ago, we were one of the main sponsors of the Toronto Documentary Hot Dogs Festival, where they had a special evening devoted to films from Ukraine, mainly about the war. We were happy to support that and to participate in that. Other things going forward, in terms of giving an outlet to Ukraine to show itself in Canada and to you Canadians, I think will certainly be there. Musical works, things like that, we're happy to do that. Could we do more? Probably, and we should do more, but I think that's a starting point that I see personally, unless other suggestions come forward. But yes, for sure. And like I said, it does motivate a lot of our work. I didn't, this Ukraine war is such a horrible thing for all of us to see, and it really makes us think about what we can do personally and as a community and as an organization in response.
One of the things that was talked about, similar to our last great question, was the idea of having satellite campuses from the Ukrainian Catholic University located here or elsewhere in the world, not just because of this time of war, but just in general, in order to have that access, especially for our immigrant refugee families and young students. So I'm wondering if that might be something that you've been collaborating on. I know there are a lot of great projects here at the U of A that are just amazing in building that collaboration. But if you can elaborate a little bit on what areas those are being built in. I know they had a lot of different developmental areas, but to share some of those, I'm sure there's some great ones here at the U of A, but where those are at this point and how that's developed over the time of the war. Thank you again.
The idea of sort of, institution building, what you're sort of describing, that probably, to be honest, is beyond our capacity and our capability. Our focus really is on the Ukrainian-Canadian community, Ukrainian-Canadian life and everything else. Having said that, clearly Ukraine is an integral part of all that. And we can and do things, and I said specifically things like performances by Ukrainian artists in Canada. We have supported, we do support that. Art exhibits, things that have come, these films, documentary films, and we've been doing all that on a project kind of basis. Can we do more? I think in terms of an institutional side, I think there are other people better prepared, and it's more within their scope to do things like that. With our program, as I said, the bursaries of students studying Ukrainian language, they go to Ukraine to study. There's an opportunity to do things. With the students who are young people who are here, we did have funding, partially in cooperation with the Canada-Ukraine Foundation for a bursary program for Ukrainian students here in Canadian institutions. And also a separate one, which is a little bit closer to what our focus is, and we had money available for Ukrainian artists and cultural creators who have ended up in Canada because of the war, to still be able to work their craft and learn and train and do things. And I think that was an important thing that we're committed to doing and we want to do. I think it was successful. There's some people that to this day are very grateful. And you can see that the energy and the talent that they bring. We've financed a couple of recent musicians, choir conductors who are in Canada, and a Ukrainian-Canadian choir takes them on as sort of a secondary conductor. Makes that choir better, gives that person a very important role to keep going in the area in which they're trained and what they do. My hope and my prayer is that this will all be behind us one day. Not too soon, but that's not coming soon.
Boris is doing a hell of a job. But those of us who are past our best before date, you all have wills. You all have the ability to contribute to Shevchenko Foundation, and you should. You have children that you're going to help. You're going to have churches that you're going to help. But at the end of the day, there is money there. Boris and I, for instance, that we collaborated in the last day or so on a several hundred-page affidavit that I had to sign, because a nice little old lady in a certain community in Ontario, the younger generation has tried to disinherit her donation to the Shevchenko Foundation, and they're spending tens of thousands of dollars on lawyers to try and disinherit an object that really was made for the community. Unless you talk to your peers and say, by the way, you're going to die. Do you want to take it all with you? Can you give something to the future of your community, which is the Shevchenko Foundation? One thing is pretty clear. You have a great president that is pursuing the continuity of the foundation, and as a lot of us that are on the board, I know that on the year, let's say 2099, there'll be a Shevchenko Foundation, and there'll be a president of the Shevchenko Foundation.
It'll still be me.
It may still be you. The effort that Boris makes in his volunteer time, flying out here and doing all this, and literally of the other directors that are in this room, the thousands of hours put in, was for the purpose of the future of the community and the survival of the community. By the way, the Canada-Ukraine Foundation came out of a board meeting of the Shevchenko Foundation. We actually were the co-creators of it, because we couldn't handle taking grants about Ukraine, and we said, you got to have another foundation somewhere. And our seed money went to create the Canada-Ukraine Foundation. So your money is your business, but your community is also your business.
So the message is, don't leave your money to your millennial kids because they're useless and you're just squandering it.
Just speaking for the artists, Boris did an amazing job remembering all those slides, and in there he only made one little slip up, and on behalf of the artists that got incorrectly named, the gentleman in the lower corner on the Reach Awards, who you call Taras Kulish, Taras is connected with the Montreal music scene. Right. That was Andrew Kushner. Okay, right. Since we brought his name up and it's going to be on the record, Andrew wrote an amazing play about his grandfather displaced after World War II and seeking a profession, apprenticing with a Swiss watchmaker, coming to Canada and making the CPR watch that was used for decades and decades and decades, which had to be the most accurate timepiece. And the recognition through Reach that Andrew got for that parlayed into Andrew following his passion as a writer and a playwright to hold a dramaturgical, which means reading plays, in workshops at Stratford 2 years ago of forgotten and overlooked Ukrainian playwrights. So these things do pay off. So Andrew Kushner is now on the record in the preservation. But thanks, Boris.
That's a correction that I'm glad you brought forward. Thanks.
When you speak about Taras, you're thinking of Kulish in the lawyer.
No, there's a Taras Kulish in Montreal.
There is, okay.
Yeah,
all right.
Sorry,
Okay. My question actually involves STEM, which is sciences and technology. Certainly, I think there's been a deep impact as far as the arts and folklore, etc. We have people in the States like Steve Wozniak, who's of Ukrainian heritage. There's certainly, I think, other Canadians. Is there a way of being able to tie or link or tie sciences and technology to your work at Shevchenko?
That's something that's come up in the past at various times. Several years ago, that MyTech project that we administered on behalf was geared towards that. Personally, and I won't speak for the entire membership or all of our supporters, I perceive there's a difficult thing. We don't have that much in the way of resources, right? We really have to sort of concentrate on what we think we're good at, what we can do. Science and technology hugely important. The good thing is, what I've noticed, and I see this in Toronto, you're talking mainly about kids coming to study. The Ukrainian students are so damn good. They don't need a lot of help to get into the great programs in Toronto and Waterloo and Edmonton and everywhere else. So, I mean, they are very, very competitive on their own. We encourage that, and we're glad that they participate in the cultural. But I don't think that there's that much, to be honest. Now, other former directors or current directors might see it differently.
Directed donations, right? The gentleman gave money for.
Yeah, there's one in the trades actually. Someone gave money, to support someone in the trades. But to my mind, we're a cultural community, arts, education, but in that Ukrainian Canadian thing, there are a million things that everybody should be doing, right? But MyTech, there are other institutions, but a little bit off, to my mind, off our beaten track.
I'm not sure this question has anything to do with the Shevchenko Foundation per se, but you did mention long-term sustainable repositories, and I wonder if you have any news for us about Oseredok, because we've heard...
It's in difficult situations. That's kind of as much as we know. Their staffing has been cut. They're looking for ways forward. We are not in a position to do a heck of a lot right now. We'd love to do more, and I think we'd encourage everybody, the Winnipeg community, to start with everybody. Oseredok, for those who don't know or aren't that close, I mean, an incredible repository of stuff. I mean, it's the oldest such institution of ours, really, and some of their collections. When in an earlier life, I was doing some research on the history of the Ukrainian DPs coming to Canada and everything else. Oseredok has a huge collection of newspapers from DP camps that they acquired. Now, these things, as with many things in heritage preservation, they might go unseen for 30 or 50 years. You don't always know exactly what you're going to want in the future, but you got to grab it, you got to put it there. So they've got a tremendous collection of stuff. I'm hopeful they're going to work things forward. I hope we'll be in a position to help do that. But again, we can't do it alone. It's got to be a much broader effort, and more people got to get involved. And we'd like to hopefully show some leadership and move it that way. But we're not quite there yet. Don't count me on that yet.
Just as someone that grew up outside of the Canadian diaspora and the British diaspora, coming here, I've been able to observe the high level of support that there is for Ukrainian Canadian culture and for the arts and all these projects. And the Shevchenko Foundation, I would say, is at the forefront of that, to be able to provide this kind of level of support. And that's something that we don't have, as I've observed, in England. So what kind of advice would you have for these other communities and other diasporas globally, especially for, say, the new communities that are being built around the world in new cities and new countries of Ukrainians that are establishing communities there that probably do want to support their culture and their Ukrainian communities in ways that they can, in similar ways that the Shevchenko Foundation has? I
lived in the UK for a couple of years. I participated in, my church parish life there. I saw things. I mean, they're much smaller communities than ours, right? So that is a challenge kind of its own. They don't have the really, really deep roots that we in Canada have, right? It's really a post-Second World War phenomenon. We're still a big community, and we've been generally a pretty successful community. In 1963, to have a surplus of $35,000 was an achievement. But that's already how generous the community was, and that generosity has continued to now, and we have people who support it. I don't know what the dynamics in the UK are for that. I do know that we, through a couple of initiatives that are interesting, but it's the Canadian perspective to it. You might know that during the Second World War, a very large presence of Canadian soldiers stationed in the UK, including a lot of Ukrainian Canadian soldiers who set up their own institutional life. The Service Club in London, it's really quite nice, just as a Canadian to be there, and Shevchenko Foundation has helped with these kinds of commemoration of Canadians in the UK, Ukrainian Canadians. And if you walk by, 222 Sussex Gardens near Paddington Station, there's the building that the Canadian Ukrainian Service Union, and there's a plaque there. And now in the neighboring church where they used the church for services, there's a stained glass window commemorating, all funded by Ukrainian Canadians, right? By us and others as well. So they should do more. I can't give a lot of advice. I mean, there's the World Congress. Yeah, should provide more leadership if that's what it entails.
Good to see you, Boris, and thank you very much for your presentation. I have a question that relates to sort of institutional cooperation as opposed to community cooperation. I'm on the board of Canada-Ukraine Foundation, as I think some others may be here representing Alberta. There was some thought recently given to applying to and working with the Bill Gates Foundation. They have a very wide spectrum of issues that they support. And when it comes to something like Osaradok, as an example, this might be an opportunity for CUF and the Shevchenko Foundation to perhaps apply to them and see if there might be some kind of a joint opportunity to work on something as institutionally important for Ukraine or for Canada that we ourselves would not be able to do on our own. And that's just sort of a thought to consider. I'm not sure if that's ever been raised in the past in terms of working with other foundations, but I only just mentioned that as an opportunity I think that we should take advantage of.
We've thought a lot about this in the past. There have been some efforts, not really consistent on our side. Bill Gates is interesting, but I would think, and you talk about Osaradok, and as a Canadian presence, what we should be looking for, we've sort of talked about this, haven't really taken this on too much, but, I presume that the CPR has a foundation. The people who built that damn train line for them were a lot of Ukrainians there. We're part of their history. They're the ones that should be encouraged to help and to participate. Institutions like that, the banks, the other thing in Canada, there's money available. We've not tackled it in any consistent way, but I think it's something that all Ukrainian organizations should look at, because that's the whole point. If it weren't for the Ukrainians settling the prairies, where would CPR be today? Where would Canada be? You're right. I think those kinds of things are important.
Thank you, Boris. To kind of riff on this last little bit of discussion, as far as raising funds, science and technology, medicine, all these different areas, donations from the community are invaluable. That's what we've been living off of and working in participation with the community. If someone did want to give to the Shevchenko Foundation, like the Timurtays, we all know about the Timurtays, but there could be another family with $10 million that could give, and it's out there. So just one more push for that.
And just correct Andri's comments, you don't have to wait till you die.
Thank you all for joining us today. Boris, thank you very much. Дякую.